I'm sitting here with Chiquita Stephenson, community leader, activist, and pastor. And she is going to go and delve into a little bit of her beginnings at the start of her career, who she was growing up, and go straight into who God has developed her into being now. So you're going to learn something about Chiquita Stephenson, probably that you may not know if you're not very close or a family member. And she's going to tell you how her story began. And I am Cherie Humphrey of Diamonds in the Rough, Finding the Spirit in Me, and this is Talk to Me Media for the column on the Bridgeport Christianity Examiner. It is March the 6th, 2014. How you doing, Mrs. Stevenson?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, and it's a pleasure having you here. And, you know, we are in a private location taping this special edition of your life, because I think your story really needs to be told. So just go straight into it. Tell us how everything began.
Well, sometimes I look back, even now, and people's assumption is she doesn't understand. She hasn't been there. She hasn't done that. And that's primarily people that don't know the struggles that I've had. And a lot of my story generates from the time with my parents. I was raised in a two-family household, my mother and my father. My mother and father, they were a strong unit, but they had their issues from a standpoint of domestic violence, drinking, things of that nature. So as a child, I saw a lot, and I was put in a position where I had to be, at sometimes, more of an adult than as a child. But it was primarily because my mom had me when she was 17, my dad was 19. They all had their issues that they had to deal with as children. And, you know, people coming from the South, primarily, it's better to keep it covered than to release it so that you can bring forth healing, because you just don't talk about it.
Absolutely.
And that's what they say, you just don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the strongest point for me in life was I had an amazing mom, but my mom didn't know how to show love. And it was based upon the fact that as a child, she was given to her aunt to be cared for. And so she was always constantly trying to find a place for who loved her. I then had a dad who was amazing in all areas, you know, from a standpoint of being a chemist by the time he was 19. But he also had his challenges of heart disease, drug use, and drinking. During those time frames, we didn't understand why he did the drugs, and we didn't understand why he drank. He was born a preemie. He weighed 1.5 pounds, and nobody expected him to make it, and he's a twin. But lo and behold, as I start to share with you in the story, you'll understand some of the reasons why. Now I understand why he drank and why he did drugs. But I think what hurt me more than anything, and this is what a lot of my classmates began to see as we were in elementary school and then going off to middle school, he died when I was 10 years old. Now, once he passed away, I went from having my security blanket, which was my father. He called me Rabbit. That's who I was to him. Rabbit. And I went from having my mom, who was trying to find herself, trying to take care of herself. You know, my dad's gone. She's in a new relationship. She's starting with a new family. So many different challenges, and I was just angry.
Mm-hmm.
And so what people don't know about me is that just about every other day when I was in school, I was fighting.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter whether it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It was just like people would come, and I was fighting every other day.
Yes, yes. I remember the Jerry curls and the Adidas, high top shell Adidas, and you know, and knowing you from that, you know, that time period, because we are same age, went to the same schools, you know, for the most part,
And people were my teachers were trying to understand. They said, you're so smart, but you're temperamental.
Mm-hmm.
That temperament came from me no longer having my father.
Right.
It also led me to 5 years after my father's death becoming a teen mother.
Mm-hmm.
Because I no longer had that father figure that was giving me regiments and requirements and demanding education first, this is what you got to do.
Right.
It was just, my mom didn't know how. It's not that she didn't want to, she didn't know how.
Yes.
She also had a lot of anger. So you had a firstborn, a mom that had anger, had emotional issues that she was trying to deal with herself, new relationship, new family coming into it, all of these challenges, but I was still expected to perform in school, perform in track with Coach Brown, play basketball, you know, whether it's dance and art, it didn't make a difference. You're still supposed to perform, but you're doing all these things, and you got to keep a smile on your face because we all remember the saying, what happens in my house stays in my house.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if something comes out of my house that I have not authorized you to tell, that's just a whole nother issue that you have to deal with.
Right.
People also recall, and people will recall that know us,
right.
the people that don't know us, is that sometimes based upon my anger, people remember me and my mother fighting side by side. So my mother would be fighting the mother, I would be fighting the daughter. You know, and people look and they're like, that can't be, I can't imagine that.
Right.
But that was how it was, because the bottom line was you weren't going to come home losing a fight. So primarily, me, I'm not going to go home and say I lost, because then that's another fight.
Yes.
So I'm going to make sure I take care of it here.
Absolutely.
So you don't have nothing to hear about.
Mm-hmm.
During that time frame, it was all about survival.
Yes.
It was all about, number one, we didn't know we were poor, because people didn't talk about that, because you always had a meal, whether it was from a grandparent, whether it was from a neighbor.
Yep.
Everybody was their brothers and sisters' keeper.
Yes, they were.
But within that, it also came with some very harsh, what I consider to be issues, where there were certain things you wanted to share that you couldn't share, because you always had to show that you were tough and that you were strong. And so there's a lot of things that went unseen because they had to stay hidden for a period of time. Just like that diamond, it has to stay hidden until the right person finds it to start cleaning it up.
Absolutely.
And I went from being in the relationship of not having a relationship with my father, to searching for a relationship, to finding myself in a couple of relationships, and then in a relationship with my son's father, who was a very abusive relationship. It was abusive. And so I saw myself repeating the same cycle that I did, that my mother did. Excuse me. And it wasn't until I had made a decision, and my sister, she couldn't stand, nobody could stand, you know, my son's father during that time frame. But I fell in love with him, at least that's what I thought it was, because he was paying attention to that little girl that was missing her father.
Yes.
And so, in looking for that attention from Daddy, I ended up doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. And by the time I was 15, opposed to getting myself ready for, you know, the college experience, I was getting myself ready to give birth by the time I turned 16. I now go ahead and I give birth to a beautiful baby boy who's intelligent, he's amazing, but he's now seeing a cycle of his mom being abused, right? It had to stop.
Yes.
And so I had to make a firm decision to say that was it, which I did. But the night that I did that, and I say this to young women all the time, I found myself going home, being dropped off one night, then being kidnapped, then being pistol whipped, then having the gun put to my head to say that it doesn't matter, I'm going to take us both out tonight. And I'll never forget it. We pull up and we get to Norwalk Community College, and right behind Norwalk Community College, that back street, there's a little pond there. And his thing was, it's freezing outside. I'm gonna shoot you. I'm gonna throw you in the pond. Nobody's ever gonna find you. And then I'm gonna go off and kill myself. The sad part about that was when he went to pull the trigger, it jammed.
Jesus.
A lady came out the door and started screaming, "What are you doing?
Right.
What are you doing?" And he sped off. Before I knew it, I woke up in a hotel. Right. And at that time, it was the DoubleTree, right where the DoubleTree is at. I think that was still the name of it.
Right.
And I had been beaten, I had been raped,
Jesus.
and at that point in time, all I'm thinking about is, what do I say? What do I do to keep him focused on not killing me? How do I keep my son safe?
Yes.
At the same time, I'm sharing with my mom what's happening, but when you've gone through a boy who your mom feels that you're paying attention to, you're listening to, he went into the bathroom, I made a phone call. And Cherie, I'll never forget that. I made the phone call to tell my mother what happened. But at that time, she didn't believe me. I understand why she didn't believe me, because she was assuming that I was telling another story to be with this young man. But that wasn't the case. And so now I found myself in a situation of not knowing whether I was going to ever see my mother, my child again, because this little girl that had finally started to stand up to say, I no longer wanted the abuse. My father is gone, but his memories are still here. Let me live off of that. And to me, that's what I want. Fathers.
Yes.
That's why I said it's time for fathers to understand. To this day, it's time for fathers to understand when you're not there for your daughters. There's someone that they're looking for to be a father. And 100% of the time, the relationship that they gain with that person is not good.
No.
It puts them in vulnerable places that can just snatch their entire livelihood right out from under them, on the basis that all that person is focused on is controlling that young lady. And I would say to fathers, you need to grab a hold to your daughters, because we have so much to offer, but we lose so much time because we need that protector. And my father was that for my mother and I, a protector. You heard me talk about the domestic violence. You heard me talk about the drinking and the drugs. Just to shift a little forward, my dad died at 31. He had a massive heart attack, and he didn't make it. But prior to that, he had had several heart surgeries. So now, my mom didn't understand, because she always assumed that my dad was faking his illness in order to get his family back, right? That wasn't the case. What was happening, thank you, what was happening is that he was taking the drugs and alcohol to soothe the pain that he was having with the same heart surgery that I had, right? But we didn't know that. I knew he was taking so much medication. I knew that my mother just said she had enough. I knew she moved on. And then he called me in the middle of the night just to say to me, Rabbit, I love you, but I'm not going to be able to get that bike I promised you. That was like at 2 in the morning. He was in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and I knew right there something was wrong. And the following morning, we got the phone call saying your father was deceased. Once I got that news, right, I took you through what happened when I was 10. He passed away. Me then, 5 years later, getting into an abusive relationship, telling you a bit about why he used drugs and alcohol. And then that puts us to the point where I was battling for a long time as a child, elementary, middle, and high school, not understanding why, but I had the same health issues that he had that went undetected as a murderer.
Wow.
And so I had to push through natural pain as well as physical pain because they said I had a murmur. So they give you a pill here, a pill there. Anxiety attacks. And feeling as though you're closed in, which again, now I have the anger, which now means you know better than anybody else. I'm a ball of fire.
Yep.
As soon as you say the wrong thing to me, I'm going at you.
Yep.
Right? Over the years, my mother and I relationship separated a bit. And she moved to North Carolina. I got married, and her standpoint was she wasn't needed. She didn't feel as though she was needed, but I needed her like everything.
Yeah.
But she needed to find her way. I needed to find my way. Right? I got married to my husband, and you know, I went to school with him. He went to school with him, Jonathan, and he adopted my son.
Amen.
We bought our first home. I was 21. He was 24. We had our daughter, and then that was another story. Everybody's like, oh my God, she's pregnant again. She's having another baby.
Right.
And people were like, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing? And at that moment, I found that I was having my children because I could love them and they would love me back.
Right.
And this is what I try to get women to understand. Why do you give birth to your children? Are you birthing them because it's something that's planned?
Right.
And that's what you want?
Right.
Or are you birthing them in order for you to feel the love that you didn't feel that you
and
felt?
fulfill a need that you never got.
And at some point in time, you have to decipher what it is, because you can end up not just continuing to mess up your life, but you can mess up the life of that child that you now have.
Yeah.
And especially if you don't feel that need being met.
Right.
And so I made a decision that I was going to be there for my kids. I was going to give them everything that I didn't have. And notice, you never heard me say something about not having material things. Remember I told you, I never knew we lived in poverty.
Exactly.
Why? Because my mother and father made sure we had everything.
Right.
Everything.
Right.
The only thing that my mother didn't know how to do was give love. Her way was giving love, but she was giving me stuff.
Giving you stuff.
Okay. And given that stuff, she felt that that was a symbol. So what do you do as a kid? Oh, give me more stuff.
Give me more stuff. Yeah, because you're a kid. That's what kids do.
You're going to give me more stuff, but it doesn't